Honorable Secretary General, esteemed Deputy Secretary Generals, fellow student officers, distinguished delegates, and guests, U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Dr. Amy Gutmann, IEA Director General Rafael Grossi, FES representatives for Youth and Politics, Frau Yvonne Lehmann, and Managing Director of the John F. Kennedy School, Ms. Lataya Roll. Founding BERMUN directors Dr. Walter Peterson and Karen Hövermann. On behalf of the organization, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 31st session of the Berlin Model United Nations Conference. We convene here today at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung with many of the student officers, delegates, and admins from our 13 committees for the opening ceremony. In addition to those here in House 1, we warmly welcome the participants of the Special Assembly in House 2 and the 100 guests participating digitally in the live stream. While some of us may be joining the ceremony from all over the world, we are in session today as a single plenary. We are grateful to the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for hosting BERMUN for the past 22 years and enabling us to televise the proceedings. My name is Carlotta Senftleben, and I have the honor of serving as the President of the General Assembly here today. Seated to my left is Nico Hammer, our Secretary General. Across the street in House 2 sit Noah Delfs and Ophelia Reuter, this year's Deputy Secretary Generals.
We have the pleasure today to be joined by the musician and singer Hanna Rubenko. Ms. Rubenko is a Ukrainian bandurist from Chernobyl, just north of Kiev. The bandura is the Ukrainian national folk string instrument with 56 strings. She will perform the 19th century Ukrainian song, My Evening Star, by Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko. Many think of him as the founder of modern Ukrainian literature and the modern Ukrainian language. Before Ms. Rubenko came to Germany, she was a youth music voice and bandura teacher and an ensemble leader in Ukraine. After the full-scale invasion started on February 24th, 2022, Ms. Rubenko began doing more public performances at political events. Would the House please direct its attention to Ms. Hanna Rubenko? We would like to thank Ms. Rabenko for her outstanding and truly emotional performance, which has highlighted some of the rich cultural and natural beauty that has been destroyed in this war. Ms. Rabenko, please accept this token of our appreciation.
This year, we once again had the pleasure of collaborating with Frau Yvonne Lehmann. Frau Lehmann works for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, where she is focusing on the topic youth and politics. Throughout the past few months, she has supported the BERMUN program to ensure the success of the opening ceremony. Frau Lehmann, on behalf of the Secretariat, thank you for all your support and for offering to speak before the plenary. The floor is now yours.
I'd like to welcome you to the Berlin Model United Nations Conference. For over 20 years, as I just learned, 22 years, the opening ceremony of BERMUN has been hosted by Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. At the FES, we feel very proud to be associated with this event, and we are very happy to help convene so many young people from various countries who are interested in the structure and politics of the United Nations. And we are finally back in person. After 2 years of a digital BERMUN, it's so nice to see you all here. Let me introduce you to Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, where your guest today. It is the oldest political foundation in Germany with a very rich tradition in social democracy dating back to its foundation in 1925. The foundation owes its formation and its mission to the legacy, political legacy of its namesake Friedrich Ebert, the first democratically elected German president. The work of FES focuses on the core ideas and values of social democracy, freedom, justice, and solidarity. With its international network of offices in more than 100 countries, the FES supports peaceful international cooperation and human rights, promotes the establishment and consolidation of democracy, social and constitutional structures, and it's a pioneer for free trade unions and a strong civil society. As a fundamental condition of sustainable development, the promotion of gender equality is a central part of FES work on the national and international level. To strengthen the democratic institutions and to encourage political participation, FES works together with partners from different backgrounds, such as national governments and administrations, political parties, trade unions, non-governmental organizations, and as well as civil society in general. Democracy needs Democrats. It's a very famous saying from our founder, Friedrich Ebert. The political education programs of FES aim to enable and motivate and qualify citizens to actively engage in political discussions, decision-making processes at different levels. Of special relevance in this regard is addressing and working with young people. We encourage you as students and members of our common global civil society to actively take part in an elaboration to answer of today's challenges. We believe that empowering young people is crucial and increasingly globalized, in a crucial and globalized world with an ever-growing need of international cooperation and the finding of globally just compromises and solutions. BERMUN 2022 is your event, and it's the perfect setting to apply your ideas, to use your creativity to develop new answers to some of the world's most pressing challenges and problems. I hope you will have interesting, exciting debates and wish you a rewarding Berlin Model United Nations 2022. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Frau Lehmann, for your remarks on the importance of participation in political discourse among the youth. We thank you for your welcoming speech and your strong support in hosting us here at the FAS. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung's generosity and hospitality in hosting our opening ceremony is greatly appreciated. Well, you've already received our token of appreciation, but still, thank you once again.
BERMUN is an expression of the whole JFKS community. Without the support of our administration, this conference would not be possible. Joining us today is the Managing Director and American Elementary School Principal of the John F. Kennedy School, Lataya Roll. Since joining JFKS in 2020, she has proven to be an enthusiastic supporter of the program at our school. Ms. Roll, the floor is now yours.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to BERMUN 2022. Dear Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, Deputy Secretary Generals, distinguished guests, delegates, and directors, welcome. I want to first begin by echoing Frau Lehmann's comments and what she shared about how important this conference is, how important your work is, and we hope how meaningful the next few days will be for you. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, as shared, has joined JFK in a partnership for 22 years. That's a phenomenal, phenomenal effort. We appreciate everything from the lights, the refreshments, the warm greeting, and of course the beautiful buildings that are both shared, as we've seen in our virtual group that's across the way and here. So thank you again. If we can please clap for them and all they've done for our school. Next, I would like to thank and welcome Dr. Amy Gutmann, our U.S. Ambassador, who's here in support of not only the American program here at JFK, but our entire school community. Welcome, Dr. Gutmann, and thank you for being here with us. JFK also has the privilege, you will be hearing a video from our Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. He has pre-recorded a message to inspire you, encourage you, and show you the importance that the work and everything that you're going to do and have worked towards really and truly means for us adults and our entire world. So we thank him virtually for what he has done for our school. All right, that's enough clapping. We have 68 participating schools, their teachers and their students, 700 plus students, including over 125 from JFK community. That is phenomenal. This is the 31st year, as you've heard, of our BERMUN conference, our theme being peace building. We all know what's happening around our world, not only in Ukraine, but across many countries and nations. We need peace more than ever right now. But most importantly, we need folks, young people like you, with great ideas, phenomenal enthusiasm, lots of energy, to really come together and be strategic about what we can do to make our world better. First off, an incredible accomplishment to our JFKS BERMUN team. They've set up a wonderful foundation and platform for you. Use it. Engage in those tough conversations. Make sure to, challenge the person next to you. During lunch, have deep conversations. Enjoy the host families, those of you that are in different homes across our JFKS community. Enjoy that time with them. But most importantly, engage and really, truly listen. Last year, I said these words, and I wanted to say them again because I truly feel that the spirit of BERMUN is captured in these 5 pieces: being thoughtful, being empathetic, open-minded, and solutions-focused. Being unapologetic and creating plans for the future that both unite us and protect our world. You are a part of history. Make your mark. Know that your input and impact in this world is great, and taking time to encourage others and also challenge is what we need right now. Thank you for being present, being positive, and being purposeful in your work. Have a wonderful 2022 BERMUN.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roll, for your welcoming remarks and the continuous support of the John F. Kennedy School. Please accept this token of our appreciation once it gets to you, right over there.
One of the two BERMUN student founders was a JFK student named Lars Day, who unfortunately passed away shortly after the founding of BERMUN. In honor of Lars Day and his commitment to MUN, BERMUN's keynote speakers are called Lars Day lecturers. This year, we have the pleasure of welcoming Ambassador Dr. Amy Gutman. After she speaks, we will take questions from House 1, House 2, and over the BERMUN platform. Ambassador Gutman assumed her position as U.S. Ambassador to Germany in February 2022. She was previously the University of Pennsylvania's longest-serving president. From 2009 to 2016, she served under President Obama as the chair of Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. Ambassador Gutman has championed life-transforming access to education, along with innovative research leading to life-saving discoveries. Thank you for being here with us, Ambassador Gutman. You now have the floor.
Hannah Rebenko, I want to thank you again. Your music poignantly reminds us all of the courage of the Ukrainian people in defense of democracy, dignity, and decency. So let's all give it up for the Ukrainian people and our support of them. Madam President, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, Delfs and Reuter, Ms. Roll, Ms. Lehman, the whole BERMUN team and delegates. It's truly an honor to address you here today, and I feel back in my role as a teacher and a scholar and as a diplomat as well, given what all of you are doing here today. I'm inspired by looking out at this room full of tomorrow's leaders. And I know that your commitment to learning more about the important challenges that are faced by the United Nations and our world will serve you well into the future and our world well into the future. So this year, there are hundreds of attendees from 25 different countries and all participating in the Berlin Model United Nations 2022. As your president wrote us, BERMUN empowers students to model the roles of all the officials and staffers who make up the United Nations. And your president, Cornelia, has been part of the Model United Nations since junior high school. And now she's president of the General Assembly. So we should congratulate Madam President. Over the 18 years, when I was president of the University of Pennsylvania, you might not be surprised about this, but students often ask me to give them advice. It was free advice, so they could take it or they could leave it. But it struck me over those years that whatever careers they wanted to pursue, the piece of advice that I thought and they thought was most helpful was to think like a successful diplomat. I gave that advice before I knew that I would be challenged to be literally a successful diplomat here in Berlin. But to succeed, diplomats need to be creative. They need to seek solutions to hard problems of our world, and they also need to be collaborative. They need to work with others. There are no serious problems of the world that can be solved singly by one leader. And in fact, those leaders who think that they can solve problems alone tend to create the problems that you are here to help solve, to help think of creative solutions. So being creative and being collaborative, those two things together are recipes for success as leaders, not only in the United Nations, but in every walk of life. I've found that collaboration and creativity enable success in government and law, in business, in education, in law enforcement, in engineering, in healthcare, or in the arts and culture. The collaborative and creative skills that you are acquiring in the model UN, thinking like a diplomat, these are going to serve you well in life. And that's why I'm a huge fan of BERMUN. BERMUN is more than it seems. It's more than a model United Nations. It's more important than ever. Creative collaboration in our world among leaders who share important values in defense of individual freedom and human rights has never been more important. With a war raging in Europe, the theme of this year's assembly, peace building, could not be more appropriate. When the United Nations Charter was signed in 1945, it was based on the understanding people everywhere would be better off in a world where people everywhere are free to speak, assemble, and worship as they wish, in a world where children everywhere grow up healthy, get a decent education, and look to the future with hope, and in a world where opportunity crosses every border. These are the elements of peaceful and democratic societies. In the 7 decades since the UN was created, despite the daunting challenges and the disturbing gap between our ideals and our achievements, the countries of the world have, until now, avoided an armed conflict between nuclear powers. We've advanced human rights and built a global economy that lifted billions of people out of poverty. And as we look to the future, we have so much yet to accomplish, so much. We must sustain the international order that has made this progress possible. At the same time, we must modernize that order so that it increasingly represents the interests, the values, and the agency of individuals of all nations, big and small, from every region on our globe. This outcome is not guaranteed. The foundations of our international order are under enormous sustained challenge from both outside and within democratic societies. So let me begin at home. Democracy is under attack from within democratic countries like ours. When I say ours, the United States and Germany, and all around the world. Escalating levels of violence, economic inequality, climate change, food insecurity, anti-Semitism, racism, sexism have left many feeling that democracy will not work for them. Polarization and disinformation have eroded trust in many institutions, both public and private. And democracy is also often under violent threat from outside forces. Nowhere is that more obvious than in Ukraine. Russia's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine blatantly violates the democratic sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all nations. It blatantly violates human rights, and it creates food insecurity and energy insecurity. The Kremlin's war of aggression in Ukraine is one of many conflicts around the globe where basic democratic principles are threatened. Basic human rights are threatened. The territorial integrity of nations is threatened. And those threats often operate secretly through cyberspace channels of misinformation and disinformation. In many authoritarian countries, rulers brutally suppress political opponents. They distort and they block free and fair elections. International freedom and prosperity are threatened. That's true now from an increasingly adversarial People's Republic of China. Add to this the worsening climate crisis and the lethal spread of disinformation and misinformation, and since the creation of the UN, creative international cooperation has never been more important, never been more urgent. So my icon is America's first diplomat to Europe and the University of Pennsylvania's founder, Benjamin Franklin. And he famously said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. History has proved him right. Nothing beats investing in the foundations of democracy, and education is key, as is health, public health, and innovative ecosystems. And it was the spirit of what I call inclusive innovation that enabled the United States and Germany to build a post-World War II order, the Marshall Plan. That order was based not just on military power, but fundamentally on the rule of law, human rights, freedom of religion, speech, and assembly, and an ongoing aspiration to secure liberty and justice for all, and to bring people who were once excluded to the table, to positions of leadership. Acting creatively and collaboratively, we must apply these values together to help realize the future sought by people all around the world. A world where technology is used to lift people up, not suppress them, where trade and commerce support workers, raise incomes, create opportunity, where human rights are universally respected, where countries are secure from coercion and aggression, and where people, ideas, goods and services move freely and fairly. And where nations can both forge their own paths and work together effectively in common cause. Absolutely critical to combating climate change and to spreading human rights around the world. Diplomats and peace builders can facilitate putting these fundamental values into action. And Franklin was himself a very avid speaker, but he also reminds us, and I quote, that well done is even better than well said. And that's why diplomacy takes collaboration as well as creativity. Collaborating with others is the only peaceful way to put creative ideas into action and to make a positive impact, whether it's on your family, on your community, your country, or the world. And that's why wherever your future takes you, wherever it takes you, the skills you acquire in the model United Nations will serve you well as peace builders and as innovators. So begin by expanding your knowledge of the social, economic, political, and humanitarian challenges facing the world, and then start thinking like diplomats, creatively together. I look forward to hearing about the peace-building ideas that you come up with together, and I want to conclude my remarks before I take questions by applauding you all for your initiative in bringing this BERMUN 2022 to fruition. Make this conference, make this the best BERMUN ever. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gutman, for taking the time to speak at our conference despite your very busy schedule. Ambassador Gutman is now open to questions from a few students from House 1, House 2, and over the BERMUN platform. Due to time constraints, we are going to take a few questions that were prepared by students from different committees, schools, and countries ahead of time. We will start with a question from Jasmine Parpel from Prague, here in House 1.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. It's an honor to have the opportunity to ask you this question. I am the chair of SOCOM 1, and one of the topics that we are debating this year is preventing violent extremism. And therefore, I wanted to ask, since the COVID-19 pandemic, acts of violent extremism have risen rapidly, and especially in the United States with, for example, the January 6th insurrection or multiple random shootings. And the United States is a key role model for other democracies. I believe that the first meeting of the Counterterrorism Law Enforcement Forum took place here in Berlin earlier this year, and that you were a part of it. And therefore, I wanted to ask you what the US federal government is doing to tackle this severe domestic issue, and how can the international diplomatic community help to stop this pandemic of violent extremism? And are you optimistic about where the current approach of counterterrorism is going?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. An incredibly important question and issue for our time. We have seen, as you have said, the rise of violent extremism in the United States and around the world. And we in the United States are taking it extremely seriously. There are many things that are being done, and I will focus on a few, but let me say that it is extremely important part of combating extremism that we educate as many people as possible as to what the values are that hold us together, and that we also seek to provide as many opportunities for those communities and individuals who've been left out of our education, our healthcare, and so on, to see that there are opportunities for them and their children. That said, the US government is using a broad range of tools, you asked, to counter both domestic and international violent extremism. And we know now that networks of violent extremism are not simply domestic, they are international. And that, I needn't tell you, you're all digital natives. You know that cyberspace and social media have made the spread of good things and bad things alike move at a pace that has never before been the case. So that's why what you called out, I would say, is a primary means that we're using now, which is the Counterterrorism Law Enforcement International Forum that we and Germany convened together with many other countries' law enforcement to get together and share best practices on how best to counter extremism. Over the past 20 years, the international community has built a strong counterterrorism architecture, including by strengthening information, by sharing relationships, and by actually mechanisms to counter groups like ISIS, for example, and Al-Qaeda. We need to do more, and we're doing more. And am I optimistic? Yes, because the only way of making progress is to be an optimist and look at the things that we can do more together. And if there were ever an example of where creativity and collaboration brought together are the answer, it is in doing counterterrorism work. And that's what we're doing. We have more and more the means to do it, and it's incredibly important for the future of our societies.
Thank you for your answer, Ambassador. We will continue with a question from Solomon Iro from Berlin, here in House 1.
Dr. Gutmann, thank you so much for your speech and your words regarding the value of domestic and international democratic institutions. You mentioned in your speech also the inclusive innovation that allowed peacekeeping and peace building between countries such as Germany and the United States after the end of World War II. Considering how, well, at this time, the infrastructure of Germany was largely destroyed and its political position was very weak after the fall of the Third Reich. Considering the current conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, how can the United States practice inclusive innovation? Provided that the Russia-Ukraine war is resolved in the coming months, is it even in the interests of the United States to practice inclusive innovation if the Russian Federation remains an active threat to the US?
So the answer is, the simple answer, and I'll elaborate, is it's absolutely in all our interests to practice inclusive innovation. And let me say a little bit more about what I mean by that. So, and let me give you a personal story, okay? Because I think it would help make this concrete. Because inclusive innovation sounds like very highfalutin, if you will. I don't know what the German translation of that is, but you understand. My father was brought up in Germany. He was born in 1910. And so he was in his early 20s when Weimar Germany became Hitler's Nazi Germany. He fled. His daughter now is US ambassador to Germany. How did that happen? That happened, and it's obviously a long story, but it's a short story in world history. There was the most amazing transformation that happened in our world after Hitler was defeated. And that transformation was made possible by something that you all have learned about, the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was a great example of inclusive innovation. Nothing like it had ever been done before. And why do I call it an example of inclusive innovation? Because what the US did was it helped fund and massively fund the reconstruction of Europe. But it didn't create the blueprint for that. It asked the countries of Europe, including Germany, to get together and come up with a plan, and it funded the plan. That was an example, as you said, of that happened after a total war. It was an enormous challenge. Now we have a war in Europe, and it will be settled when Putin is willing to make peace, and it will be up to Ukraine to determine when it is possible. It is not possible now because of Putin, not for any other reason. Ukraine wants nothing more, and its allies want nothing more than to sit down and make peace. When that's possible, there will be the need to help Ukraine reconstruct itself again. It will be inclusive, because only with the will of people do democracies go forward, are democracies created. In the meantime, there's a lot of other work of inclusive innovation to do. All the time. We created, thanks to Germany's leadership with the US in this G7, something called the Futures Forum, where just a few weeks ago, I had the great pleasure of being in Munster and seeing a group of young people come together and deliberate about how we could move democracies forward in a digital age, how digitalization and social media can be used productively. not just what problems they create, but what solutions can happen through that. And bringing young people across different walks of life together to help solve problems and empower them and support them to do that. That's part of inclusive innovation. So I am extremely confident that that is going to be the path forward, whether it be in peacekeeping and peace building or in doing more innovations to stimulate economies and include more and more people who were once felt left out into the future of prosperous democratic societies.
Thank you for your answer, Ambassador Gutman. We will now hear from some more in-person students in House 2.
We will entertain a question from Kaden Pradhan from London here in House 2.
Thank you again, Dr. Gutman, for your superb speech. I'm the Assistant President of the Second International Court of Justice here at BERMUN, and my question is, what role do you think international courts of law, like the International Court of Justice, play in maintaining global peace, especially when their non-binding judgments often go unrespected?
Great question. The International Court of Justice, as the US recognizes, is an incredibly valuable institution. And it is true that while its judgments are not binding, it's also true that they carry a lot of weight. They carry a lot of weight with every country that values the rule of law and values justice. And that's why the goal of liberty and justice for all is an ongoing goal. It's towards a more perfect union. And the International Court of Justice represents that to the whole world. And so we believe it's critical, it's just absolutely critical to reinforce the importance and the stature of key institutions like the International Court of Justice. And that makes the principles and the purposes of the United Nations all the more apparent to the world and all the more important to support.
Thank you. We will now entertain a question from Sarah Peruta from Warsaw here in House 2.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador Gutman, for your speech. Could you please expand on what you earlier referred to as a spirit of inclusive innovation and how this could play a role in rewriting the foundations of democracy, which are currently under attack?
Absolutely. So the foundations of democracy are currently under attack in many places, but they're also very strong and they're very important to all of us. None of us would be here today if those foundations hadn't been built and cared for. And as President Biden rightly says, democracy doesn't happen by accident. It is hard work and it's good work. And that's where inclusive innovation comes in. Democracies from their beginning were created by being more inclusive, of making people citizens, active citizens. But from their beginning, they were also excluded critical people. Many of the people in this room were excluded by virtue of their identity from early democracies. If you were a woman, if you were black, if you weren't in some democracies a landowner, you were excluded. So the progress of democracies have been one of increasingly including people and also innovating. And what do I mean by the innovations? Well, first of all, you have to think out of the box to become more inclusive as a society. People were brought up to believe that all men are created equal, meant all males were created equal. They were brought up one time to believe that all white males were created equal. It took creativity. It seems obvious to us now, but it took creativity to break through those binders. And now we're at a time when it's even more important to think creatively. It's very important to think creatively about how we can come together to combat climate change, for example. We're going to need technological creativity, but we're going to also need diplomatic creativity, because we need countries that are now not working to support the international order, but working in ways that undermine it. We need to cooperate with those countries to combat climate change. So there's so much creativity that is needed. There's also creativity needed to figure out how to craft compromises that move us forward. So I look to you and this body as the innovative, inclusive body, because I think the UN has that potential at its best. But in order to realize the potential, you've got to be both creative and collaborative. You can't just think about how things were always done. You have to think about how things can be done differently. Albert Einstein famously said, the problems of the world are not going to be solved by people, the same old ideas. So you have to think creatively. The you who has to do this has to be a more and more inclusive you. So thanks for that question. I leave it to you to actually define what inclusive innovation means today, because part of my role has been, over the last 2 decades, to support and empower more and more young people to have a role at the table and to be able to help what they want to do, what they want to see the world be in the future, help make that happen. And that's a very joyful activity, because I've seen, we created prizes for young people at the University of Pennsylvania, where they went out and created the first school for girls in a town in Ghana, for example. Or right in Philadelphia, helped people who were transitioning, immigrants who were coming into the US and in Philadelphia, have leadership roles. So there's so much to do here in the Model UN to move inclusive innovation forward.
Ambassador Gutman.
We will not be entertaining more questions from House 2, and we'll now move back to House 1.
Got a little too excited there. Ambassador Gutman, thank you once again for addressing all our participants, as well as your helpful answers to their questions. Please accept this token of our appreciation. It is on its way right now, as you can hear. Ambassador Gutman will now have to leave the opening ceremony, but thank you so much for your time thank you so much for taking the time to address our participants, and we wish you well on your next engagement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Over the past years, it is a tradition that a talented student from JFKS creates artwork that aims to encapsulate the conference theme. This year, Felina Serdan painted a powerful image of the problematic necessity of violence and peace building if the international rule-based order is to be maintained. You can see the art on the banner behind the dais, in the conference program, on the first page of every research report this year, and on the BERMUN website. We appreciate Felina Serdan for her truly creative work.
we now have the honor to introduce the German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock. Minister Baerbock has prepared a video for this year's conference. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Greetings to your Model United Nations Conference from the German Foreign Office in Berlin. Here in my hands, I have the United Nations badge that I use during my trips to New York to enter the UN headquarters. As foreign ministers, obviously, I go very often to the United Nations in New York. And during those visits, my colleagues and I do exactly what you are doing at your conference now. We debate and negotiate, we search for common ground, and we vote on joint resolutions. And very often, frankly speaking, we experience what you might experience as well. How hard it is actually for so many delegates to agree on one text or one decision. Sometimes we argue for hours about 2 words. And it's tough work that takes time even before the meetings. But in the end, it's worth all of the effort. Because negotiations at the United Nations are about more than documents or pieces of paper. They go to the core of how we want to live as a global community. They concern our rights, our freedom, our peace, and our security. Particularly now, as we stand up to Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. And it's also at the United Nations that we seek solutions to the greatest challenges of our time. The climate crisis, the pandemic, the global food crisis, all threatening millions of children, women and men worldwide. And no single country is strong enough to tackle these challenges alone, and no one can afford to ignore them. And that's why, more than ever, we need the United Nations. As a forum of states, but also as a place where civil society, NGOs, activists, and young people like you can make their voices heard. I wish you all the best for your conference, and I hope to see you here in Berlin or at the United Nations in New York or Geneva at some point. Maybe with a UN badge like this one here. Have fun and enjoy your conference.
We would like to thank Foreign Minister Baerbock for her encouraging words.
Now, we would like to hear from this year's Deputy Secretary General Noah Delfs. It has been our pleasure to work with him over the last year. Noah has been a committed member of the MUN program since 7th grade. His work was pivotal in the preparation for BERMUN. On top of that, he entertained the entire student officer team with his hilarious jokes from jokes.com. He will now introduce the committee topics and explain their connections to the conference theme of peace building. Mr. Deputy Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Pursuing peace in a world of war and conflict, this was the conference theme at last year's BERMUN conference. I now ask that you take a close look at the conference art of last year. As you can see, it says break glass in case of war. We are now at a point within Europe where this protective glass has been destroyed. On the inside of the glass rests an injured dove, unable to spread its wings and the message of peace. So what has actually changed since last BERMUN? Well, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of this year, a war between the two commenced and has continued on since. But perhaps even more noteworthy than that, at least from a European perspective, a lot of people's attitudes towards war have changed. A study conducted by the European Parliament reveals that European support for the EU is at a high, which was last achieved in 2007. Additionally, the same survey reveals that 88% of Europeans are in support of a common European defense and security policy. But what does this statistic really reveal? Europeans feel vulnerable for the first time in a long time with the dawn of this war. The survey reveals that Europeans support the EU because they recognize that there's a greater strength and security as one united body. Again, from a European perspective, why are people reacting now? There have been many other international conflicts in the past that have not motivated the public to take matters into their own hands. Taiwan, Yemen, Myanmar, and Ethiopia are just a few examples of conflicts that have not received a similar global response to that of the Ukraine-Russia war. Well, for one, geographically speaking, this conflict is quite a bit closer than the other ones. For another, it has been a long time since the aggressor of a conflict is a nuclear superpower. And finally, and probably most importantly, the effects of the Ukraine-Russia war are undeniably being felt by Europe. For example, Germany, which has publicly supported Ukraine by sending them weapons and other resources, is now experiencing severe energy scarcity related issues. This is because Germany received over 50% of its gas from Russia before the war. The idea of war has become more tangible for Europeans since last BERMUN. This means that their relationship and thereby also their approach to discussing it has been affected. This will have an enormous and permanent effect on individual attitudes towards international security and relations. Aiming to reduce the risk of lapsing or relapsing into conflict by strengthening national capacities at all levels for conflict management and laying the foundation for sustainable peace and development. The word peace building, of which I just read the United Nations definition, is this year's conference theme. With the backdrop of the Ukraine-Russia war, we can expect nuanced debate as a result of not only possible new national policies, but also because your relationship with the idea of war might have been changed by recent events. This year, every committee will either analyze at least one unique aspect of peace building or concentrate on a specific conflict. They are highlighted accordingly on the screen. Topics that focus on unique aspects of peace building are orange, while topics that focus on a specific example of a conflict are highlighted in green. For example, the Security Council will focus specifically on the Ukraine conflict within the frame of peace building and peacemaking, while the Economic and Social Council will explore the roles of nationalization and privatization in the context of peace building. Hopefully, in doing so, the necessity of peace building at all stages of conflict will be further understood. And while you might think that peace building is currently a rather distant idea, given that war is wreaking havoc in Europe as we speak, peace building remains just as essential during war as before or after. At this year's BERMUN conference, many facets of peace building will be explored to highlight the importance of laying the foundation for long-lasting peace through peace-building efforts. And finally, as we return to our injured dove, it is important to recognize that not all hope is lost. The dove is still alive and can be nurtured back to health with the medicine of peace building. Speaking of actually doing the work of peace building, I now have the distinct honor of introducing the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Rafael Grossi. Mr. Grossi assumed office as Director General of the International Atomic Energy Association in December of 2019. He is a diplomat with over 35 years of experience in the field of non-proliferation and disarmament. He has generally he has generously prepared a video for us to watch in which he remarks on the role of atomic energy in peace building.
Dear friends, peace builders, it is really a great pleasure to speak to you today about the ways the International Atomic Energy Agency contributes to BERMUN's theme of today, peace building, at this difficult moment in international relations. The IAEA is rather unique, special within the UN family because we are, in essence, a scientific and very technical institution. We have laboratories, apart from offices, we have lots of laboratories here in Austria and in Monaco, in which our scientists use nuclear science to study the ocean, plants, water, and the air. And that knowledge allows them to assist countries in widening their capacity to use all of these techniques and technologies, nuclear technologies, to improve lives. By facilitating cooperation among all the states that are part of the IAEA, we are 175, helps countries work together to address problems you are mainly familiar with, like water problems, food scarcity, or diseases like the pandemic, like COVID, that you suffered in Germany and we here as well, or cancer. I'm sure you have heard about nuclear medicine and radiotherapy. So this is some of the work we do. So, but there are other examples. For example, scientists are using these nuclear techniques, they are called isotopic techniques, to study how microplastics, so teeny tiny particles of plastics that you cannot see with the naked eye, but are there in the ocean, are passed through the food chain. This means they are eaten by the fish and they are there. So they continue, they pass on to us, to humans where they are consumed and so on. So this damage that plastic is doing to the seas and to the animals is something that we are studying and that we can try to do something about in order for it not to be so bad, so damaging. Another example is, for example, the use of radiation to make crops, things that you put in the earth and they give us food, etc., stronger, to resist droughts in places where you don't get enough rain, or pests. So with a nuclear technique, you make the seeds better, stronger, more resistant. This is like a joint effort that we have from the IAEA, and we work together with countries. This is why the IAEA's motto is Atoms for Peace and Development. So it is this idea that we are working in all of these different areas. Building trust is important for an organization like ours. And this has to do with another part of our work, about which the IAEA is also quite renowned, which is stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons. So making sure that there are no more nuclear weapons in the world. And how do we do this? How does the IAEA does this? Well, we do it by checking that in places that, for example, have a nuclear reactor to produce energy, the material there is not being stolen or being used to make bombs. And this you do with inspectors. And these are our inspectors, the inspectors from the IAEA. And in this way, we generate this trust, confidence, that there is a lesser threat of war, and we allow countries to keep their focus on the well-being of their people. And there are some countries that took decisions to go in a different direction. For example, you may have heard about North Korea. North Korea left the IAEA, told the inspectors to go home, and why they did this? Because they decided to develop nuclear weapons, which was, of course, very regrettable in a country that has so many needs in terms of the living conditions of the people, where there is hunger and other things. There are other cases where the IAEA, if you follow a little bit in the press, is frequently mentioned. For example, in the case of Iran. Iran has been having a very active nuclear program, and there have been doubts about it in the past, or even in the present, I'm sorry. Some people are asking questions, so we are working very hard to make sure that there are no doubts about what Iran has been doing, for example. This is very important. Iran used to have an agreement with some countries. This agreement has been interrupted. So there is some anxiety about what may happen in that country. And the IAEA is there to try to appease the situation by sending inspectors, by trying to avoid these doubts. So this is part of the effort that we are trying to display, working hopefully with Iran. So as you can see, the work is very diverse. The work has different areas, and we will be always, as IAEA, extending to countries like Iran and others opportunities to rebuild these confidence. So this is the way in which an international organization tries to work in a cooperative way with our member states, being in the non-proliferation area or in these other aspects I mentioned before, having to do with science, with technology, and with the economy of the country. So it's all about generating, as I said, confidence and helping in building peace, an area in which you, as future leaders, are, I'm sure, going to have a very, very important role. And I should, of course, mention that when it comes to energy, when it comes to the work of the IAEA, there is another important contribution which we are making that has to do with nuclear energy, which is debated sometimes around the world. You know, you're familiar with the debate about climate change, the fact that our planet, by virtue of the human activity, industry, and the burning of fossil fuels, is getting warmer, with all these consequences for the atmosphere, for the environment. Nuclear energy is an energy that is very low in these emissions of carbon dioxide that generate these warming conditions, which are so bad. This is why, from the IAEA, we are trying to make sure that nuclear energy is used in a way that is positive and that contributes to a cleaner, to a safer world. Perhaps you don't know that already now, as we speak, in Europe, a good amount, almost half of the clean energy which is produced in Europe is of nuclear origin. So there is a contribution that nuclear energy is bringing to the table to make sure that countries have options, renewable energies, nuclear energy, hydropower, so all sources of energy that do not cause any harm to the environment. So in this area we are very active, whether it's drawing up safety standards, also helping countries ensuring that nuclear material doesn't fall into terrorists or criminals' hands. Perhaps the last point that is in everybody's minds these days, and I'm sure that you in Berlin are very aware of the war in Ukraine, where we are faced with an unprecedented situation. Because this time, it is the first time that a major nuclear program, like the one in Ukraine, you know that Ukraine has half of its energy from nuclear reactors. And there are many reactors in the country, and there is a war. So there is this danger that there could be an accident because of the war. And the IAEA has been helping the country and has been trying to make sure that no one shells, especially one nuclear power plant, which you may have heard of. It's called Zaporizhia, which is right on the front line of the war. And I was there, I visited there. We are trying to help the people there, and we are trying to establish a safety and security zone around that plant. We hope to be able to do this, because this would reduce the threat and would reduce the fears. So, as I said, we are trying to create these conditions for a better world in the scientific area, in medicine, in food, in agriculture, in the environment, in the safe use of nuclear energy by averting nuclear accidents and preventing nuclear material from being used for the development of nuclear weapons. So we hope that this description has given you an idea of what an international organization does to do some good in the world through a very technical mandate like the one we have at the IAEA. In any case, I wish you success, viel Erfolg in your future activities, and I hope that by listening to me today, you could have an idea of why the multilateral work, why the work you are studying through BERMUN is so important for us as humankind in Germany, but also in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, all over the world. So I encourage you to continue following this kind of work, and who knows, in the future, some of you will be working for an international organization, and even perhaps to the IAEA. For now, it has been a pleasure, and I hope you found these comments interesting. See you soon. Dear friends,
we would like to thank Director General Grossi for his remarks on the value of nuclear energy in international peacebuilding. We also extend a special thank you to Lars Bespolka for making this possible. Please accept this small gift as a token of our appreciation.
Every year, the BERMUN press team prepares a video to celebrate the opening of the conference. This year, the video team has focused on the conference theme, Peace Building. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Dear delegates, honorable chairs, beloved admin, and distinguished guests, welcome to BERMUN 2022 and welcome to Berlin. This is the 31st annual BERMUN conference, and more importantly, it is our first in-person conference since the lockdown of 2020. Since its beginning in 1992, BERMUN has served as a common ground, a crossroads for students all across the world to come together, congregate, discuss complex modern issues, and draft solutions. In the wake of several armed conflicts arising all across the world, our theme for this year's conference, peace building, is perhaps more relevant than ever before.
As always, our host is the John F. Kennedy School. This Berlin-based bilingual school was founded in 1961 on the basis of providing equal opportunities to both German and American students. Given the fact that this will be our first in-person conference after 2 years of online MUN, we cannot wait to get this conference off the ground.
Whether you're a BERMUN veteran or you're just starting out, we've asked the Secretariat some questions to help us all get oriented.
It was a dark Wednesday night here at the John F. Kennedy School. The Secretariat was having a meeting with Herr Lück, one of the BERMUN directors, and we were playing Hangman, obviously. We hadn't decided on the conference theme yet. We knew that we wanted to do something about peace. The war in Ukraine had been raging on for about a month at that point, and it was in everybody's mind. So it was actually me who guessed the word for Hangman. I guessed peace building after we had already gotten rid of most of the letters, and that was the conference theme. We all liked it, we all agreed. One word conference theme, peace building. There are other conflicts right now that relate to peace building as well, and we hope that peace building can address anyone from anywhere, not only from Europe, but from Asia, Africa, South America, North America, Oceania.
I think we were mainly inspired by the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict. I mean, when we were picking this topic, what was that? That was like March or something. So of course it wasn't brand new, but it was something that was relatively new to us. It was the first large-scale conflict that we as students in Europe really experienced that was close to us. And that's why we kind of thought of taking peace building, because it doesn't only encompass resolving a conflict, but also creating a society which in turn ensures that you won't have another escalation to conflicts like these. And that's why we decided to go with the topic of peace building instead of peacekeeping, because we wanted to make sure that we really were able to tackle all the different angles and not only look at how to resolve conflicts, but also how to prevent them and how to keep peace in general.
So the mission of BERMUN encompasses a few different ideas. The first idea is making delegates, all participants, politically active and politically aware. Debating increases your awareness of other people's perspectives and can help you come to some idea about the world that you didn't have beforehand. And I hope that BERMUN can help you be politically aware and politically active and make a change to this world to build peace and to prevent war.
I think something that at least students in Europe realized after the outbreak of the Ukrainian conflict is that war is not something that we simply left in the past after World War II. I mean, obviously there were conflicts all over the world raging on during the time between the end of World War II and now, but I think something that makes it a lot easier for us to ignore is that we've always had this long peace in Europe, which of course is incredibly Eurocentric, right? Just because it's not happening here doesn't mean that the conflicts happening on other continents aren't important, especially if in most cases those conflicts are proxy wars led by the different powers within Europe. And I think this conflict in Europe has led to a kind of newfound awareness. I mean, we've moved away from this notion of never again, we don't ever want war again, to having an increased amount of military spendings within Europe, and a significant increase at that. And I think this has kind of forced us all to reconsider what we believe peace to be, what we believe peace building should look like. And that's why we thought that for a conference topic, we would force the people attending to kind of think about that and think about how you can prevent peace if militarism is the way, you know, we should just let everyone have nukes so that everyone's just kind of scared that if they start something, we'll have nuclear fallout. Or if maybe the way is to demilitarize, you know, to make sure that countries have as little military power as possible to really invest in economic relations and economic interdependence worldwide. And with that, of course, at the same time, you kind of have conflicts like the Ukraine conflict, where this economic interdependence has led to a kind of incapability to act during unjust moments. So it's a very convoluted, very complicated topic, but that's why we thought that it would be so good to bring it up at this year's conference and to discuss it, especially with all that's going on at the moment.
We are grateful to the BERMUN press team for this video, which was produced through the hard work, energy, and creativity of Tony Aldani, Zoe Lehmann, Ayana Krause, Talena Passens, and Benedict Winkler. We are also thankful to the entire press team led by Mia Robertson, who will be reporting on the conference work and writing about the conference theme and committee topics.
Our Secretary General, Nico Hammer, will now offer you a crash course on peace theory and its many contradictory demands. Mr. Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Bear with me. A few weeks ago, before we had the incredible luck of getting Ms. Hanna Robenko, who's now left, to come to BERMUN, we had a Ukrainian musician tell us, "Why is your theme peace building? I don't want to go to your conference." That's harsh, but it's a fair perspective. As millions of Ukrainians fight for their sovereignty, lose their homes and their lives to the nuclear-armed Russian state, which many countries have now labeled as an authoritarian and even criminal regime, how can we ask them to build peace? A peace agreement would likely damage Ukraine's territorial integrity. Ukrainians want autonomy and independence. According to a poll from September, 87% of Ukrainians oppose territorial concessions to Russia. Ukrainians want justice. At the ongoing UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky named several conditions for negotiations with Russia to take place. The restoration of territorial integrity, respect for the UN Charter, compensation for all material losses caused by the war, punishment for every war criminal, and guarantees that this does not happen again. Right now, a peace agreement is unlikely to include that because the Russian Federation is unwilling to give up what it has gained and to take accountability for the war. And I think that might make you pessimistic about the future of this war. It's not possible to predict when war and destruction will end. Soldiers and civilians will continue to die. That's the sad reality. That's the reality of many wars. The civil war in Yemen, the conflict in Ethiopia, and the insurgency in Afghanistan, just to name a few others. And that would be the reality of the wars of the future. Right now, the People's Republic of China is not only threatening Taiwan's autonomy, but its existence. The threat of war is real. And we must try to prevent war and end ongoing armed conflict. But ending the war in Ukraine doesn't necessarily mean the conditions President Zelensky named will be met. Peace does not mean there is justice. Therefore, I ask you, is it just to pursue a peace agreement if it forces the victims of war to make concessions? Should we pursue peace building and thus neglect justice? Well, to answer that, I want to explain what peace building means to me and what I think peace building should mean to you. Noah mentioned the definition of peace building about half an hour ago, but let me refresh your memory. Since 2006, the United Nations defines peace building as measures that aim to reduce the risk of lapsing or relapsing into conflict by strengthening national capacities at all levels for conflict management, and to lay the foundations for sustainable peace and development. Okay, so how do you build a foundation for sustainable peace? And is it possible to do so while ensuring justice? Think of peace building as a process, not a point in time where you move from complete war to complete peace, just like that. Peace building concerns the period before, during, and after war. To get you to think of it that way, I like to isolate two seemingly opposite ideas, explore their implications, and then bring them together. Now, where there is war, there are weapons. Weapons are the fuel of war. If the goal is to end or prevent war, the easiest means to achieve this goal is to get rid of all weapons. That's the basic idea of disarmament. The UN is an advocate of disarmament, usually pertaining to biological, chemical, and of course, nuclear weapons. There are various treaties regulating the production, stockpiling, and use of these weapons, such as the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Then there are conventional weapons. Every country has them. They're not only used for self-defense, conventional weapons fuel offensive war. They have for more than 1,000 years and continue to do so in Ukraine. The Geneva Conventions and other UN treaties govern which conventional weapons may be used during wartime, aiming to limit the effects of armed conflict, especially on civilians. So to build peace, countries should completely disarm. Well, there are a few problems with disarmament. Here's two. First one, back in December of 1994, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine became parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and effectively abandoned nuclear arsenals to Russia as part of the Budapest Memoranda. The US, the UK, and the Russian Federation agreed to respect the independence and sovereignty of those countries in their existing borders, as well as to refrain from the threat or the use of force against any of them. That photograph right there shows Russian President Boris Yeltsin and the Ukrainian president at the time signing that agreement. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, and now Ukrainians are defending their nation's sovereignty and autonomy against Russia, which possesses nearly 6,000 nuclear warheads, and is in breach of the agreement that made Ukraine surrender its nuclear capabilities. If only one party disarms, it loses its ability to practice self-defense. So the second problem, for disarmament to guarantee security, it needs to be multilateral. That's the problem. In the past, the process of multilateral disarmament has taken place when there is some form of peace between those disarming. But disarmament requires trust. And in an ongoing war, it is unimaginably difficult to build trust between the belligerents. Conventional weapons, at least, will always be there, and they probably should. Article 51 of the UN Charter reads, "Nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations." So who thinks that the Russian Federation and Ukraine will disarm, or even in the case of Ukraine should? Realizing countries will not give up their weapons just like that is an uncomfortable truth, and that might make you feel cynical. With this, you might turn to the seemingly opposite extreme. Armament, the idea of military deterrence. Throughout the Cold War, the foundation for peace between the US and the Soviet Union was nuclear deterrence. The two superpowers were aware of the mutually assured destruction in the case that one would engage in nuclear warfare. They continued to stockpile nuclear weapons in competition and established a balance of terror. If a country's military capabilities threaten the prosperity or even existence of another country, they are deterred from provoking conflict and war. But again, there are problems with this idea of building a foundation for peace. Nukes don't solve everything. Millions of soldiers and civilians were killed by non-nuclear weapons in proxy wars instigated by the United States and the Soviet Union. When we speak of the peace between the US and USSR, we refer to the fact that there was no direct military war between the two countries and that no nuclear warheads were used. Nowadays, NATO's nuclear and military power hasn't deterred Russian aggression against a NATO ally. At the same time, the Russian Federation has, to some extent, successfully deterred NATO from directly engaging in the war. Military deterrence as it exists hasn't worked to prevent war in Ukraine. Honorable delegates, it's easy to be cynical. I've now presented two opposing ideas, both of which have flaws and both of which do not end this war. But here's the thing, it can always get much worse. That sounds really negative, but think of it this way. Why hasn't it gotten worse? The Russian Federation invaded Ukraine 9 months ago, on February 24th. In March, it began the occupation of the Kherson region. In September, Russia annexed the region. Russia's military outnumbers the Ukrainians. Its defense budget is 10 times higher than that of Ukraine. But just 5 days ago, Ukrainians recaptured Kherson. Since the invasion in February, millions of Ukrainians have been fighting for their autonomy, for an end to this war that guarantees justice for Ukrainians. And once there is justice, once Ukraine has regained its territorial integrity, there can be a state of peace. In that sense, Ukrainians are not only fighting for autonomy and for justice, but for peace. They are fighting to drive Russia out of Ukraine and end the war. With the liberation of Kherson, Ukrainian Defense Minister Yuri Sak stated, "We are confident that now Russians are beginning to believe that they will never be able to win this war. We see the panics in their ranks. We see the panic in their ranks. We see the panic in their propaganda machine. But of course, this is a very important moment. This war is far from over." We can all despair at that thought, that this war is, as Minister Sak says, far from over. Or we can look to the people fighting for Ukraine, all people defending democratic rights and sovereignty and standing up for justice from Ethiopia to Taiwan. To answer my question from earlier, should we pursue peace building and thus neglect justice? The answer is yes and no. We should pursue peace building and we shouldn't neglect justice. The peace building process should bridge the gap between the fight for justice and a state of peace. So let's not be cynical. Let's be optimistic, as Ambassador Gutman told us. Let's have hope. Hope because there are people fighting for peace. Hope because despite what I said about military deterrence, it has worked to a certain degree. The Russian Federation hasn't launched any nuclear warheads yet. That does not mean it's worked perfectly, but in this ongoing peace-building process, military deterrence still has a role. NATO countries continue to provide Ukraine with arms and deter Russia from engaging in nuclear warfare. A lack of military deterrence, however, contributes to war. In 2014, the Russia-Ukrainian war began when Russia annexed Crimea. NATO condemned the operation, but did not work to deter Russia from annexing the region. Yes, NATO would have risked conflict with Russia, but that's what it's doing right now. Military deterrence supports the struggle for justice by containing any attempts to escalate this war to a higher level. When this war is ended, the peace-building process can focus on avoiding a relapse into war. That requires trust between nations. Again, we should have hope, because despite what I said about disarmament, it has been successful to a certain degree. While the threat of nuclear weapons remains, for decades, the number of nuclear weapons worldwide has been decreasing steadily. It is now less than 1/5 of the number at the height of the Cold War in the 1980s. Do you want to guess what percentage of chemical weapons still remains since 1997? 1%. That statistic gives me hope. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons won a Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts in multilateral disarmament. Multilateral disarmament requires transparency and trust between involved parties. People like Director General Rafael Grossi give me hope, knowing the IAEA is working to prevent nuclear fallout and facilitating negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. It makes a difference. The United Nations makes a difference. This condemnation of the Russian aggression and reaffirmation of Ukrainian sovereignty independence, and territorial integrity. It is an attempt to preserve the rules-based international order and part of the struggle for justice. That gives me hope. Peace building is perhaps an everlasting process, but that does not mean you should be pessimistic about peace. In early October, we received an email from an MUN director from a small Russian town. I'd like to read this email for you. I would like to thank you, all the directors of the BERMUN conference, the administration of the JFK, and everybody connected with this annual great event for cooperation with our school for more than 20 years. Unfortunately, we won't be able to participate in the conference this year. We are not allowed to have any foreign contacts. For me, it's a tragedy. I always remember the meeting with the journalist, undercover agent in North Korea, at BERMUN 3 years ago. It seems mad, but that story almost has become our real life. I really hope we will have a chance to change everything, and we'll live in freedom and democracy. I believe we will meet our BERMUN friends again. This email is depressing, but strangely, it makes me optimistic about the future. Realizing there are people defending peace and fighting for it. The 14,000 Ukrainians that have been detained for doing so, and the millions of Ukrainians, the 14,000 Russians that have been detained for doing so, and the millions of Ukrainians that persevere. These people standing up for and fighting for democracy, peace, and justice, the people showing resistance wherever they may be, they give me hope in peace building. Honorable delegates, as the struggle for justice continues, not only in Ukraine, but throughout the world, the peace-building process is active. As you seek to stop and prevent war at this conference, your ideas can support the process of peace-building. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico, for your elucidative remarks on the path from justice to peace in the peace-building process. At this time, let us remember the UN Charter, which aims at 1, being committed to maintaining peace and security, 2, developing friendly relations among the nations, 3, achieving international cooperation in solving international problems, and 4, being a center for harmonizing the actions of member states. As we open this United Nations simulation, let us keep both the memory of 1945, of those who created the UN, they who labored to prevent the scourge of another global war, in mind, while simultaneously work to achieve a sustainable future in our 21st century. With this in mind, as we begin our conference work, on behalf of the entire student officer team and to all others involved, it is now my distinct honor to declare the 31st Annual Berlin Model United Nations Conference as officially opened.
Distinguished delegates, some of you will now have the opportunity to address the forum and weigh in on the topics. Although most ambassadors will give their opening speech in the second half of the opening ceremony, some ambassadors and delegates will address the conference theme now. We will call up 5 member states at a time. Ambassadors, if your countries are announced, please line up beside the podium and then proceed to the podium to present your speech in the order you were called. Remember to keep your speech within the time limit of 1 minute. In the event of speakers going over time, the Secretariat will hit the gavel to remind you to conclude your speech. Delegates, please hold your applause until all 5 speakers have addressed the Assembly. After each set of 5 speeches, we will entertain 1 to 2 rights of reply. A right of reply is a short question directed at one of the opening speeches. It is a rhetorical question, which means it will not be answered. If you wish to give a right of reply, please line up at one of the microphones after the set of speeches. We will entertain rights of reply from delegates in the General Assembly, that is House 1, and those in the General Assembly committees participating digitally. If you are joining us via the live stream, please access the BERMUN platform and send a message to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category Forum Work/Debate. Again, if you wish to give a right reply, please access the BERMUN platform and send a message to the Secretariat Forum mailbox using the category Forum Work/Debate. We ask that you keep your rights of reply clear and concise. If any delegation would now like to be the first one to hold an opening speech, the ambassador should place a slip with the country name into the helmets being passed around by the admin team. It has become part of the BERMUN tradition to use a blue peacekeeper helmet to collect the slips. Once all the slips have been collected, we would ask Dr. Peterson to draw the name of the first delegation to hold an opening speech. We will now be collecting slips. Please write your name and your member state on one of the slips and put it in the helmet.
Would the House please come to order? All right, we'll be stopping the collection of the slips right now and let Dr. Peterson pick our first ambassador speech. Yeah, you can come up here just so we can get you on camera as well, so we can record everything.
And the lucky winner is DPR Korea.
This year, the first opening speech will be held by the Ambassador of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Afterwards, following alphabetically, we will hear from the ambassadors of DR Congo, Ethiopia, France, and Germany. After you have held your opening speech, please wait until all 5 speakers have finished their speeches before returning to your seat. Please also be reminded that the speeches should not be longer than 1 minute. Due to time constraints, you will be interrupted after 1 minute has passed. The ambassadors that I called upon, please line up beside the podium before the speech begins. Again, that is the ambassador of DR Congo, Ethiopia, France, and Germany. Please line up beside the podium. Please give every ambassador the respect that they deserve and listen attentively. Additionally, please hold your applause until all 5 speakers have addressed the assembly. Ambassador of DPR Korea, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Honorable Secretariat, chairs, fellow delegates, distinguished guests. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea recognizes the global security environment as the worst it has been since World War II. The UN was founded to not see any repetition of past mistakes of war, and therefore we shall create such resolutions to honor UN's purpose. The increasing hostility and military threats in the Korean Peninsula by the United States have greatly threatened the security of our people. USA's arrogance causes fundamental danger to international peace. The order implemented by the United States shows an imperialistic power structure that gives precedence to the interest of the United States over the common interest of the international population. Therefore, we call on the UN to restore global unity and security and safeguard international justice. Long live the People's Republic. 존경하는 김정은 원수 만세. Thank you.
Please hold your applause until all 5 speakers have addressed the assembly.
Honorable members of the Secretariat, esteemed fellow delegates and distinguished guests, we, the delegation of DR Congo, gaining the global attention in the past years in the phenomenon of extremist organizations, believe that all measures must be endured and participate in and eradicate this phenomenon to eliminate all attacks and occurrences throughout the years, aiming to political, economic, ethical respect, and severe measures have been taken. It is recommending nations to collaborate in order to reduce this phenomenon and finally eliminate violent extremism. As such, the DRC looks forward to receiving assistance as well as providing assistance in every way possible to states, fully committed to eradicating this phenomenon. We're willing to participate in any and all plans for the best way to proceed. Thank you.
Delegates, we ask that you please contain your applause until all 5 speakers have addressed this assembly. Thank you.
Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, the state of Ethiopia has an extensive history of hostility and violence. Particularly in the Tigray region, there are alarmingly high rates of massacres, rapes, attacks, and destruction of infrastructure committed by the armed forces of the region. The federal Ethiopian government has responded to the unprecedented levels of brutality in the only way it knows how, obstructing aid. As with any crises, the population is suffering tremendously under the burden of the de facto blockade. The United Nations Charter explicitly expresses the obligation of this assembly to work to assist the world. We, the United Nations, have a responsibility to help when required, and 7 million people are currently in desperate need of that assistance. It is essential that the Assembly strives to diligently bring this conflict to an end, perhaps deploying military assistance, whilst also working to ensure human rights and the prevention of violent extremism for all. Thank you.
Student officers and delegates, please contain your applause.
Honorable Presidents, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, As you all know, the world today is changing at a pace we've never seen before. And while these changes may in many instances be beneficial, they would also introduce new issues where global cooperation is necessary to find sustainable, long-lasting solutions. One such issue is the development of war and warfare in the last decades. War is no longer solely fought on battlefields with traditional arms. There are new issues such as cybersecurity and the spreading of misinformation and propaganda through channels such as social media that must be considered when strategizing and making efforts to build peace. France is committed to spending this conference discussing ways to solve these issues and build a continuous peace that will benefit the global community. The French delegation would also like to recognize our vetoing rights in the Security Council and the responsibility that that brings with it. And we intend to use the vetoing rights in a way that will not only benefit the people of France, but the global community as a whole. And we expect that the other nations with the same vetoing rights will uphold the same agreement. Thank you.
Honorable chairs and fellow delegates, peace, security, and development are not isolated spheres, but in fact, one is not possible without the other. It was in this context, in 2017, the German government, under the regulation of the Federal Foreign Office, drafted an overall interministerial concept on dealing with international crises and armed conflicts. The guidelines on preventing crises, resolving conflicts, and building peace. Preventing wars and genocides, protecting minorities and human rights, providing resources and aid are all part of our ideology. Nowadays, there are hardly any crises where the effects are not felt by Germany at some point. Helping crisis-hit countries is therefore always in our interest. Looking around the world, it's not difficult to see a starving child in a war-ridden country, an innocent soul that was a casualty for a war that they had no part in. A ton of people who had their rights cruelly taken away. In these times, where chaos and violence seem to surround us, we should all strive to maintain and build this fragile thing called peace. As the delegation of Germany, we are more than ready to do so. Thank you.
Now you may clap. Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates in House 1 wishing to make use of a right of reply, please approach the microphones closest to you. Again, rights of replies are rhetorical questions, meaning they will not be answered. We will take a right of reply here on your right.
Does the ambassador for the DPRK truly believe that the General Assembly should accept their ideas for peace building when it is the case that DPRK itself has been isolated and a force of tense violence in the recent decades?
And one more here on your left.
We, the delegation of the USA, would like to ask the delegation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea whether they are aware of the fact that global peace building can rather be achieved by distributing democratic values than offending neighboring countries by random military aggressions as they tend to do. Thank you.
Thank you, delegates. Thank you, ambassadors. We will now be moving to House 2 for our online participants that are ambassadors.
This year's BERMUN is a hybrid conference. Therefore, we've prepared a video with recorded ambassador speeches by the 7 ambassadors who are participating in BERMUN digitally. These opening speeches will come from the ambassadors of the Republic of Korea, Nepal, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Finland, Liberia, and Algeria. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Honorable chairs, distinguished delegates, after the Korean and Vietnam War, the state of South Korea has made it its duty to help and protect the community, stop any armed conflict and any illegal act. It is forever thankful to the 16 UN member nations that took part in its rescue after the General Assembly's resolution so-called Uniting for Peace during the beginning of the Korean War. We, the United Nations, have the future of our citizens in between our hands. We must collaborate more effectively throughout the peace continuum and focus on all aspects of conflicts. We must always serve the community and protect people from any criminal conduct. Consequently, we should endeavor now to develop and ensure furthermore peace and stability to protect human rights of all parties. Thank you.
Distinguished chairs, fellow delegates. The Ambassador for Nepal is honoured to be engaging in discussion with you today and in the following days. The delegation of Nepal is eager to address the ever-escalating issue of the war in Ukraine, which affects us all, not only as states, but as people. This conflict has directly impacted our global economy, be it through the human cost of the war or the resource cost associated with it. This economical and political instability, which started in March of 2020 and was exacerbated by Russia's actions in February of this year, has led to a loss, or should I say a recession, in democracy, particularly in Southeast Asia, consequences of which we see today in Sri Lanka and saw last year in Myanmar. The rise of nationalistic movements have often led to hostile states who seek benefits only for themselves rather than for us all. Distinguished chairs, fellow delegates, the delegation of Nepal is looking forward to engaging in some fruitful discussions and working in unison to address the issues this ambassador has raised. Thank you.
Children from a young age are constantly taught the importance of sharing and resolving conflicts peacefully. So how come grown politicians in the 21st century are still unable to resolve situations with words and consensus? Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, and most esteemed guests, Kazakhstan firmly believes that peace is achievable through simple diplomacy. Since gaining its independence, Kazakhstan has maintained positive diplomatic relationships with the United States, but its shared borders and close economic ties with both China and Russia meant that Kazakhstan will have to take into consideration these two major powers in this foreign policy. Through its multi-sector foreign policy, Kazakhstan has managed to establish friendly economic relationships with these powers of the world. If children can learn how to resolve conflicts peacefully, so should politicians in the 21st century. Remember, as United States President Ronald Reagan once said, peace is not an absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means.
Honorable Chair, honored delegates. Whether with friends, family members, or colleagues, we have all come upon disagreements in our private, social, and professional lives. If you look up the term disagreement in the dictionary, you will find the synonym fights. However, both terms have different meanings. While disagreements are usually verbal conflicts, fights include violence, destruction, and even casualties. Currently, there are 27 ongoing conflicts in the world, including the war of aggression in the Ukraine, the war in Yemen, and the political instability in Lebanon. The above-mentioned conflicts have dramatic impacts on the rest of the world. In the year 2022, more than ever, the globalization has helped different countries to develop. However, worldwide aggression affects the supply chain and leads to inflation, resulting in increasing prices of basic food supplies, causing people to struggle to live their daily life. As the UN, we shall find ways to protect the preamble of Protocol 2nd, which states that every human being must be protected in times of war. The Ambassador of Latvia thanks all delegates for participating to prevent further fights. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, honored delegates. In an age where conflicts can arise from seemingly every aspect of our world's community, it grows ever more important to work toward keeping the peace we have worked so hard to achieve, and strive for bringing peace into those areas we have since failed to conquer. With the focus on the protection of our environment and recognizing the upcoming challenges we are going to face regarding climate change, the delegation of Finland would like to encourage all member nations to work towards establishing reasonable and achievable guidelines, as well as solid and reliable protocols. We should prepare ourselves for any bi- or multilateral conflicts so that eventually these will no longer be our main focus. We need to stand united to be a strong force.
Chair and fellow delegates, Liberia has always had a great dependency on imports from other major countries of rice, poultry, eggs, and other animal and cereal products. Separately as well, fuel and clothing. Because of this, Liberia strongly supports the growth of globalization and, by extension, economic interdependence. Economic interdependence as a result of globalization supports peace throughout countries by building foundations of trust and teamwork, and aids governments that may have a lack of resources, funds, or in the case of many developing countries, separate priorities. We believe that the weaponization of EI, as we will call it for short temporarily, is not or should not be seen as a justifiable option. The harm of sanctions and embargoes extends beyond the targeted country to other smaller parties interdependent on the target. The weaponization of EI is a danger to many and a risk to international peacemaking despite its nonviolent methods. Nationalization is not present in the Liberian economy, while privatization is integral to us and our allies such as the US. There is an argument to be made for systems of nationalization like in China, but it is entirely dependent on a government that can support it. If we as the countries in power choose not to weaponize our tools of global trade by perhaps placing restrictions on how far one country can go with sanctions and embargoes, along with an approval process to make sure the effects of such are not too detrimental to connected countries and allow for countries to flourish economically by focusing on privatizing our economies in an attempt for a better connection, we will have a more efficient path to peace. Thank you.
Honourable Chair, fellow delegates, the issues caused by the tension between Iran and Iraq have been alarming for many decades. This goes way beyond the scope of the war between the countries and drifts into unnerving territory for nations all over the globe. However, as in any conflict, the local civilian population are the ones who suffer the most, from a war which they were involuntarily roped into by the respective governments. The violations of human rights seen in this tragedy have only further fueled the tensions between the countries aforementioned. As the United Nations, we have a duty to aid the ones in need. Thus, we should strive over the coming days to bring a decisive conclusion to such a terrible conflict, harming so many innocent lives, and to ensure human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates in House 1 wishing to make use of a right of reply, please approach the microphone closest to you.
We will entertain a right of reply from our virtual delegates. The Honorable Delegate of Tuvalu asks, does the delegate of Kazakhstan believe that the war in Ukraine could have really been prevented by a foreign policy like the delegate of Kazakhstan is suggesting? Thank you, delegates, and thank you, ambassadors. Even if you are virtual, we are glad that we could entertain your ambassador speeches. Following the Russian aggression against Ukraine in February, the General Assembly opened its 11th emergency special session on February 28th. In October, a draft resolution on the question of the territorial integrity of Ukraine was introduced. In the second half of the opening ceremony, after all ambassadors have held their speeches, we will be entertaining a debate on the resolution before you, and the ambassadors will have a chance to vote in favor, against, or abstain on the resolution at the closing ceremony. The resolution document is available in the plenary section of the platform, under the poster board. We ask that all delegations read through the resolution and agree on how the ambassadors will vote at the closing ceremony.
The commitment and dedication of our student officer team has been essential in making this conference a success. Since March, these devoted individuals have spent hours researching and writing reports, contacting guest speakers, practicing the rules of procedure, and organizing the logistics of our conference. We will now introduce the student officers of BERMUN 2022 by their respective committees. Please hold your applause until the very end. We will start with the student officers here in House 1 in the General Assembly. The chairs of the Disarmament Committee are Solomon Iro, Zara Louise Danziger, and Melissa Kampkin. Please rise. The chairs of the Environmental Committee are Philip Wagner, Josephine Riemer, and Sarah Gallagher. The chairs of the second Social, Humanitarian, and Culture Committee are Tadea Tsering, Anna Rice MacLeod, and Thomas Hadrell. I know. The chairs of the first Social, Humanitarian, and Culture Committee are Jasmine Parpel, Mila Ward, and Ixio Jin.
We would now like to introduce the student officers in the Special Assembly here in House 2. Please rise, but don't clap until the very end. The presidents of the Economic and Social Council are Nicholas Heidbrink, Samuel Beer, and Sarah Peruta. The presidents of the Historical Security Council are Lily Smith, Theodor Hach, and Lena Kinder. The presidents of the Security Council are David Simonelle, Paul Kepler-Guras, and Anna Giulia Cantoni. The presidents of the Special Conference are Maya Hoff, Konstantin Thiessen, and Anya Kamali. The directors of the Youth Assembly, who are currently in their own opening ceremony at the Latvian Embassy, are Natalie Hicks, Noah Beer, and Magdalena Brauer. The presidents of the International Criminal Court are Tayo Yuang, Zeba Spolka, and Jason Zhao. The presidents of the First International Court of Justice are Eva Davidovich, Justin Berlin, and Karolina Kowalska. The presidents of the Second International Court of Justice are Friedrich Martens, Kaden Pratan, and František Mali. The chairs of the Junior MUN Committee are Matilda Adelhofer and Philip Harashta. We would also like to acknowledge the heads of the administrative staff, Kate Beckley, Marla Cook, and Stella Brass. The student officers have proven to be an enthusiastic and resourceful team. Let us now give a final big round of applause to all of our student officers.
In a few moments, we will entertain a short break. Afterwards, opening speeches will continue in the General Assembly. Meanwhile, all special committees will convene in their designated rooms. Before the break, however, there are a few announcements. Throughout the conference, the press team will be publishing articles about the individual organs of the conference and the topics discussed. Be sure to stay updated with reports about the entire conference by reading the press page, which can be accessed via the BERMUN platform by clicking on News. If you are not a participant of BERMUN and you would like to keep updated on what is happening during the conference, the press team will report its work on the BERMUN website, bermun.de, under the page titled Press. Please also make sure to check out the BERMUN Press Instagram page at BERMUN 2022. And at this time, we would like to extend our gratitude to Alexander Gintar and the entire team from BERMUN World, who worked on the platform throughout the past 3 years. Alexander, your contributions have been invaluable in making digital and hybrid conferences not only possible, but exciting. Thank you.
Participants of BERMUN, your directors have received individual COVID tests. We want to thank you for helping us keep everyone safe and healthy by testing each morning before you arrive at school. Like the German health minister, we urge everyone to wear masks at this opening ceremony. Thank you.
All participants of BERMUN in House 2, you will now join your first committee session. Delegates of the SPC, you will meet your student officers here in the plenary. Delegates of the HSC will meet in room 1.02. The SC will meet in room 6.01. The ECOSOC will meet in room 6.09. The ICC will meet in room 119. In House 1. The ICJ1 will meet in room 122 to 121. It's a big room. In House 1. The ICJ2 will meet in room 120 in House 1. The Junior MUN will meet in room 1.03. Thank you. In House 2. Please meet your student officers and let them guide you to your room. If you are participating digitally, delegates, please be quiet for another short minute. If you are participating digitally and are a part of a non-General Assembly committee, please join your committee sessions via the meeting link on the BERMUN platform under My Forum. Please also be reminded that after the reception at 6 p.m., there will be a bus shuttle back to the John F. Kennedy School for those who have registered for it.
Delegates of House 2, please be in your forum in 20 minutes at 3:35. Student officers, after the first committee session, please meet the Secretariat in House 1 or via the student officer Zoom call if you are participating digitally. Delegates of House 1, we will entertain a break of 15 minutes.
Will you please come to order?
Food is available. Please be back in your seats by 3:30. We will continue with the remaining ambassador speeches. In the meantime, guys, I need like 2 more seconds, okay? In the meantime, please enjoy some more music from BERMUN legend, Finn Craft. Thank you for your attention.